And welcome back to the show. This is another episode of the Be Successful series. And today we have a very special guest. Karim Abouelnaga is here, and he's shaking his head. That means I got the pronunciation right. So
Got it right.
thank the
Thank you,
Lord.
Brian.
And we're here to talk about education, education and how vital it is to ensure that the younger generation has the ability to move forward and progress and advance and better themselves and their families. So, Karim, I am very excited to get in this topic with you to discover all of your work. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, let's just jump right in. You are a first generation American. And something that I have found in having entrepreneurs within my sphere or network is that people that are either first generation or come over here for the American dream, the opportunity, they go after it like none other. And I was wondering, if is America all you've known, or did you come over here as a child, and do you feel that same fire within you?
Yeah, I mean, I was born here, and this was my first country, but I've definitely explored the world. My family came over from Egypt, so I've been there a few times and try and make a trip every single year. It's, I think, also a dangerous stereotype that immigrants typically hustle harder and they work harder, because I'd say that for a lot of people, it isn't actually the norm. And I think I say dangerous stereotype because I was in school at one point. I had 60 absences when I was in seventh grade because I was completely disengaged. And it baffles people when the norm they have in their head is that every single person who comes here is going to be invested and excited about education. And the truth is, we have to understand the importance of it before we value it. And I would much rather we get to a place where we're saying immigrants are no different in their desire, and we need to treat them in the same way that we're treating all of our students, but understand their unique set of circumstances and challenges. Because if we just say all of them are going to come in and they're going to be at this higher level, if all of a sudden they're giving us what we treat as being the average, they're now disappointing us and they're making us feel as if we needed something more from them and they didn't deliver. And so I just caveat that a little bit, so we can create a level playing field, that when someone does give a little bit more, that we see it as such and we recognize that. And being one of seven, I know even in my own household, right, seven different life outcomes, seven different life paths, even though we have the same story, same household, and same upbringing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I did not mean to try to pigeonhole all immigrants into one category and say that they're all hustlers and everything. I specifically said entrepreneurs that are in my circle, and I've seen that same drive from them. But obviously, that just falls within entrepreneurs in general, usually. Obviously, everybody can get disenfranchised and kind of set back, take a step back for a little while, whatever. But I do think it's a very good point that you brought up to level that playing field and understand that we're all humans,
Mm-hmm.
we're all people, we're all humans. We all have, like you said, different life paths. And to have that, maybe there is somebody listening that had that expectation in their head. And what you've just said kind of, oh, open their eyes a little bit or challenge them a little bit. So I definitely appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and to your point, Brian, let's not discourage the non-immigrants for making them feel like, oh, I might be competing in the same industry or the same space as someone who might be a first generation or an immigrant, and now they have this leg up because they had a harder life story coming up. I think actually being an entrepreneur, to your point, you've already embraced the more challenging road, right? The innovation, the setbacks, and everything else you're going to deal with. And
Yep.
so throw that out. That only comes up when you've started to succeed. And so before that, it's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter.
Ooh, that's a good point. I like that. Yeah, because we tend to put so much pressure on ourselves as an entrepreneur. And even when we're just thinking about getting started, there's a lot of pressure that comes even with that, even though we're not quote unquote doing anything with it or right now. So yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Of course, yeah. There's no special qualification to being an entrepreneur other than I'm ready and I want to do it.
That's right. That's right. And reading about you and your story, you said at 18, that was when you discovered the achievement gap that was going on. And I was wondering what opened your eyes to that and made you see that it was there.
Yeah, I mean, I think now I can say it selfishly, right? I was looking for scholarships. I was getting ready to transfer colleges, and one of the scholarships I ran across, I was eligible for. The United Negro College Fund put out a competition in collaboration with Coca-Cola, and they said, we're going to give $10,000 to any student who comes up with a solution for the achievement gap that involves corporate intervention. And as you can imagine, at 18, I knew nothing about the achievement gap and I knew nothing about how corporations work. None of my family had ever worked for one. But I wanted $10,000, in the process of transferring so I could get those funds. And so I did what I thought anyone would do at that age. And I went on Google and, here I am Googling things. And I guess I was lucky enough that that was around, watching YouTube videos, reading research reports. And the achievement gap wasn't just something that I was learning about. It was something that was influencing my life in that moment and had influenced my life and my friends' lives for decades. And so I'm learning about the numbers, and the numbers aren't just numbers. They're real people. They're my siblings. They're my friends. And the achievement gap, for those who don't know, is just the disparity in academic achievement between rich kids and poor kids and Black kids and white kids. And that's what they call the gap. And just as a result, all the statistics are showing that if you're growing up in a lower income household, or if you're a minority or first generation or low income, that the quality of the education you're receiving wasn't the same. And as a result, you had worse academic outcomes. And so that really started to bother me. I had achieved up until that point, but recognized there were all of these barriers that were still coming my way that I wasn't familiar with. I started to read more statistics, like only 11% of first generation college students graduate college over 6 years. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, like, everyone's told me up until this point, college was 4 years. Why is it a 6 year statistic? And why is it only 11%? If you're first generation or low income, you're going to have a harder time graduating from college. And I, again, didn't understand why. And so in those moments, I remember making this like weird oath to myself and saying, I'm not going to be another statistic. And I was naive, obviously, because you're going to be a statistic either way. It's just, are you going to be a positive statistic or a negative statistic? And at the time, I was basically saying I didn't want to be another negative statistic. But I didn't know what the barriers and the challenges would be that someone who was growing up in my own situation would have to deal with, that I now appreciate and intimately understand at a much higher level today. And I was just so committed to rewriting that narrative for kids growing up just like me and for myself at the same time. So I got really passionate about it. At 18, you still think you can change the world. And that naivete fueled me. I jumped in and I haven't looked back since. So 14 years into the journey now, and incredibly grateful that I took that first step.
Yeah, 100%. At 18, you think you can do anything. And the truth is, you can. And well, within certain limitations. Obviously, if you're growing up and you've hit your peak height of 5'2", you're not going to be an NBA All-Star. But within
Hey,
reason,
Muggsy Bogues, there's
well,
examples.
there's outliers in everywhere. You're absolutely right. But going back to that naivete or that drive to change the world and do something, you call it the achievement gap. And it was only the fact that when you started looking into it, number one, for selfish reasons, that it started to open your eyes. But what really kicked into gear from what I heard from you is when the numbers became not numbers, but they became people. And you could see it happening within your life, within your community. And I'm curious, why not call it the opportunity gap?
So when I talk about it, I actually do reference it as an opportunity gap, but all of the research that's out there talks about it as an achievement gap. And so I try and like bridge the gap there for folks, because if you go and search opportunity gap, there isn't that much literature on it. It just is more commonly known as the achievement gap. But yes, the common like understanding today from educators and people in the space is that it isn't actually an inability that children have to perform better in school. It literally is a lack of opportunity, a lack of resources, not being given the same, even just like household environment, which some of us have no control over, right? Whether you're growing up in a two-parent household or a one-parent household or a household with your grandparents, that already puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to achieving in school. So it's nuances like that that we sometimes can't close just by providing extra tutoring that exist. But we understand it's not the child's innate ability to do well. So it just happenstance trying to keep up with what folks are who are not in the education industry are going to understand. But to your point, absolutely comes down to opportunity there.
Mm, interesting. I was looking at it from a different perspective, and now I get it. What you're saying is that it's basically the opportunity gap is, I guess, what you would call the slang term of the achievement gap. The achievement gap has all the majority of the research and the studies behind it, but the opportunity gap is just what everybody calls it, right?
Yeah, or the other way around. But yes, everyone calls it the achievement gap. In education, to people who are like local to that, they call it the the opportunity gap. But I did want to touch
Ah,
on your point about the naivete and the idealism because I realize as we get older, we lose that. And that in and of itself, like just creates a huge opportunity for folks. And one of my friends, he videoed people from the ages of like 3 until the age of 70 and asked them if there was one thing you can change about your body, what would it be? And the adults were there like, I want to get taller, want a smaller nose, I want bigger eyes, I want more hair. They were thinking about all of these tangible things. And then they asked the children the same question. And the kids said things like, I want a mermaid tail, I want cheetah legs, like I want shark jaws. And you realize as an adult, right? It's funny, like you can't get those things, but as an adult, we didn't even go to that place. And we know there might be no way to give a child a mermaid tail, but could we invent something that allows them to move through the water like a mermaid? Right? There's no way to change a kid's legs out and put cheetah legs on there, but could we put things on children's feet that will allow them to move at the speed of a cheetah? And that is, in essence, right, the beginning of the innovation and the creativity. And so as we get older, we start to lose that idealism because we know, oh, that's not realistic. But by not being able to go there in the first place, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to create something new in the world, right? That gets us one step closer to that innovation. So there's absolute value in doing it when you're younger, but I think there's a lot more value as an adult having that awareness and like pushing the boundaries of what you think the limits are.
I couldn't agree more. An exercise that I do if I'm ever working with someone that's trying to form a new business or form a new idea is just visualization. And I especially when it comes to building a business and building a brand behind it, is just putting yourself on a sidewalk and staring at a blank storefront display. You walk down the street, you see a storefront display in Macy's or whatever. It's all decorated nice, it's beautiful, on brand. Well, stare at that wall and put your brand in there. When you
Oh,
walk by, what do you want people to feel? What do you want them to think? And it's that kind of allowing that inner child to come out. That
Brian, how do you get them to stretch beyond what they think is the limit of their imagination?
I just I give them permission.
Mm-hmm.
Just give them permission. That's all most people are looking for anyway, is just permission. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have the ability and my permission to put down anything that you want.
Mm-hmm.
We'll figure out the reality of it later.
Yep.
Just like the mermaid tail.
Yeah.
We'll figure out the invention later. But let's have the inspiration now. Let's have that feeling now.
Well, at that age too, you haven't been hit with the reality in the same way, right? You haven't you didn't have
Right.
the oh, I need to make money so that I can provide for my family or I can pay rent or I can cover my bills. So you haven't jumped into the water yet and started to drown if you don't know how to swim. So you haven't had those real world experiences that would push you away from it. So I was just curious to see how you get people to stretch back to the bounds of what they think is possible as they get older, which gets harder and harder as you add in more and more of life's realism in there.
It does. It does. And sometimes it takes, it takes more than one try or more than one way of explaining something. But yeah, you just gotta, if the person is serious and they're committed, you know, it's your responsibility, my responsibility to keep going and trying different avenues, different explanations to try to bring that out. And again, just give them that permission to have those creative and inspirational moments just within themselves.
Mm. Yeah. And Brian, the other thing I would say too, just related to the earlier question is that is the beginning of the journey of an entrepreneur, right? It's having some sort of deep connection to the problem that you want to solve. And then that is what you obsess over. It just was a little bit less straightforward when we're talking about a social issue or a social problem like the achievement gap. But those numbers becoming real people was just personalizing the problem for me in a way that made me more motivated and inspired to want to do something about it, right? For half the inventions out there, they get created because someone was frustrated with the prior version or the lack thereof, something like it. And so all I was doing was saying, this is a problem that I now intimately understood and was really frustrated by and was personal, that also implored me to act. And I think the change the world piece just ties in with the fact that it was a social issue that I think was impacting so many more people.
Yeah, and that moves perfectly into the next question that I had for you was in reading up on you and seeing all of your materials, you mentioned the word um, culturally response culturally responsive curriculum.
Mm.
And I'm curious to know, what do you mean by that, or what is that?
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up because it's one of those sometimes taboo or misunderstood words. But I think of the culture as what's trending, right? What is happening today? What is cool? And we started building curriculum as a company really during the pandemic because we were trying to figure out how do we relate what children need to be learning today, right, in school, whether it's math or reading concepts, to what's actually happening in the world right now that they're reading and hearing about, right? With COVID, with maybe Beyonce's tour. I think who's the other one? Lizzo was going on tour. The bubble with the Lakers, and I think I forget who was playing in the championship that year, but playing in the bubble and the dome. And so, how do we apply the concepts that children are learning today in school, and at the same time hearing and listening to at home? Children today aren't limited to the conversations that their parents are having around them to know what's happening in the world, right? Anyone can just get online now on social media and you see what's happening. So, how do we take what they're already engaging with day to day and provide them with the curricular content to make it more engaging? So, when we talk about culturally relevant, we're talking about what's happening today, what's culturally, what are people talking about doing around you, and how do we tie what you're learning day to day in school to what's actually happening to make it not just more interesting, but more applicable. So you have that real world connection immediately.
Yeah, that's super interesting how you would do that just to make everything that you're doing with the children more engaging and more relevant, like you were saying. Do you have an example of like something that you could link from today's culture to a lesson or curriculum?
So I don't have one off the top of my head. I know when during the pandemic, one of the things that was happening was the ballots, like mailing in the ballots, and you needed a certain number of like drop off stations across the different neighborhoods. And so we created a math problem for students for mail in ballots because of COVID. People weren't going to the polls in the same way. And so you're able to simultaneously like take what they're reading about or listening to on the news about ballots and counting them and not being able to go to the polls and doing a math problem with the number of boxes, mailboxes they might need in a given neighborhood to capture all of the ballots. So that was an example. The other thing too is thinking about contextually, where do they live? So when we're working with our children in New York City, we're drawing in application from the Brooklyn Nets, right? The local basketball team, or the New York Knicks. We're talking about the trains, right? The trains that are running there locally because they have a very robust metro system. And so we're taking things that they're seeing all the time that they can relate to make it more relevant. So it's one step further than someone being able to see their name in a problem. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, if I saw my name in a problem, like that lit me up. I was more excited to solve that problem, right?
Right.
Now
Yeah.
it's we might not be able to put everyone's name in the problems, but we can show them the context of where they're living. So here's the train station, here's Madison Square Garden, here's Times Square, here's the 6 train, and then creating problems around those to make it more relevant for them.
Super interesting. Very cool. Very cool. So I'm glad that you're doing that, and it's got to work because, like you said, when you have that problem that has your name in it, like it gets you lit up, gets you more engaged. And I can only imagine that living in an area, like you say, seeing that overhead train all the time, if you were able to tie that in to one of those time problems, like the train takes off at this time from this station and goes this many miles per hour and all of this stuff. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Something else that you said in again my reading up on you was you're using cutting edge technology in order to help reach these students and bridge that achievement gap. I'm wondering what kind of cutting edge technology are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, listen, in 2020, when the pandemic hit, there was a big push online. And I think there was also this big realization that the schools that we serve, which are predominantly low income, Title One, which is the federal classification for that, are just historically left behind and always get left behind in these technological transformations. And at the time, we started building our own gradebook and behavior management software for schools with the recognition and realization that if I'm a school leader, it's been really cumbersome and difficult right now to manage my school. And one of the most like obvious problems that we saw was when teachers are building their classes on Google Classroom or having their Zoom sessions, the principals had no access to what was happening in those classrooms without getting the direct link. And I'm sure you know this, we're doing this interview on Zoom. Sometimes you send the wrong link or the link expires after a few weeks. And so if I'm a school principal now, I'm sitting at home trying to manage during the pandemic and I have no way to get into all my classes. I don't know who's showing up or where they're going. And so we made a bet that a lot of the big technology companies just still wouldn't serve our market. And typically what happens is they serve middle class and affluent schools because they know there's discretionary dollars there and they build the software for them. Then they say, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you low income schools too. And maybe we'll give it to you at a discount or even for free. And that's typically what happens. But we know it's more challenging at the bottom than it is at the top. And so if you can design for the lowest common denominator to address those challenges there, then there's a wider array of applicability after that, right? Because they may not need all the features, they may not need it to be as intricate, but it'll work for them. Whereas if you take something off the shelf that works and meets the bare needs of the folks at the top who don't need that much, and then you put it into an environment where the need is greater, functionality doesn't exist, certain problems aren't solved for, it's not a perfect solution. So we jumped into that space. We started building gradebook, behavior management software, communication tools to be able to just all have all of that not only accessible but in one place. So school leaders can engage with families, they can engage with their teachers directly, they could make changes on a classroom basis. And now if I'm a school principal, I can manage my school in a hybrid function, right? Because if I have some classes online, I can still get in there in person and fully remote because everything's synced and everything was there in one spot. So that's what we're thinking about, right? And that's what we're building right now. I think where we really want to get to is a place where we're calling it real-time tutoring. And that's not just, hey, let me reach out to someone and get a tutor, but teachers are giving us access to children grades by putting them in there. When a child does bad on a unit assessment, typically what happens is they're told to go home and maybe work on it or correct it, but sometimes nothing happens. The teacher just has to move on the next day. And so if you scored a 60 or a 70 on that unit, who's providing you with the support to make sure that you understand it before they move on? And so what I would love to get to is let's move beyond just blanket tutoring where kids need it. Yes, the research shows that tutoring is absolutely beneficial. We do that in person and online, but it's not the most cost efficient or cost effective. And so where we could really make a difference is when that child struggles on that unit assessment and their grades are input, then they have the tutoring support specifically to close that gap. And if they need ongoing tutoring, great. But if they don't because they got the content, then they can just keep moving on. Then teachers aren't delayed or sidetracked. I mean, we're seeing a lot of issues today, even just with absenteeism. And so there's a lot of gaps that just one adult can't fill. And we need to be more intentional and targeted with our resources. And my hope is we're a couple of years away from getting to that point where we get an exit ticket or we see the assessment and we have an open collaboration with the school and we're able to intervene in real time to make sure that the kids get what they need to keep moving forward.
Okay, so the software that you're talking about, it's still under development right now.
So no, there's elements that are already out there. So the grade book, the behavior management, the communication to parents, those are all there. Where I want to get to is that next level of how do we get real-time tutoring done? Because we see assessment data, we get an exit ticket, interim assessment, unit assessment, whatever you want to call it. And we're able to make sure that we're targeted in those sessions to help kids get what they need to be able to keep moving forward.
And when that part of the platform is ready to go, or I'm guessing you're going to roll it into one CRM, for
Same
lack of a
stop.
better term.
Yeah, we're continuing to build and iterate. So schools joining now are going to get the benefit of that in the future.
Awesome. And that kind of goes again perfectly into my next question is what does it look like for a school to work with you? Like, are you guys a nonprofit? Do you charge a fee for them to work with you? And does it vary depending on the location or population size of the community? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we contract directly with schools and school districts. So schools will pay us, and then it really depends on what they need. We're a program first company, and so what that means is we're not coming in and just sort of saying, "Here's your solution, go figure it out on your own." With everything that we do, there's a training, there's an onboarding element, there's a program design element, and then the cost really varies. We have schools that we work with for as little as $2,000, and then others that are spending upwards of $500,000 with us.
Now, is
But
that per
it's
year or per month?
per year.
Okay.
So it really depends on what they need. Like, are they using our software or not? That's okay. Are they purchasing curriculum or do they have their own thing? Do they need supplemental support? Are we providing tutoring in person during the school days or are we just doing after school? Are we providing virtual tutoring after school? So there's a whole host of ways we can partner with schools. Our focus area are kindergarten to 12th grade. And again, we're really targeting urban low income schools as being our primary area. We're kind of coming in and really trying to close the achievement gap. And so I'd say that is where the bulk of our resources come from. But then depending on the city we're in, that changes who we're contracting with. New York City, we have a very decentralized school system, which means principals there have the autonomy to make the decision as to whether or not they're partnering with us and what services they want, which is different than Denver, where we also work in very centralized school district, and the decisions are made at the district level, and then the services or programs are procured for a number of schools.
All right. Excellent. Thank you for that. Because I'm sure there's going to be some people that are teachers or in the education space that are watching and be like, this sounds awesome. How does it work? So,
Yeah, get your school principals on it. That's I'd say always the starting point, and then we can start the conversations to follow up after that.
yeah, see there you go, folks. Go ahead and share this show with anybody that you know who is a school administrator or principal, vice principal. Share the show with these people and so they can learn all about what Karim does. And talking about what you're doing and the company that you've built, I want to kind of go back to the beginning for just a little bit. You mentioned that this started while you were in school, while you were in college. You started this practice, this company,
Mm-hmm.
and it was you and a few team members. And what was what was that like when you were starting that, when you were all just sitting around in your dorm room, brainstorming, figuring this thing out? What was that like? What was the conversation, the excitement like back then?
Yeah, I mean, so at that point, I had been on my way to Cornell, like transferred, was there as a sophomore. So I did my freshman year at Baruch in New York City. And I had actually applied for Ernst& Young's Your World, Your Vision competition. So I learned about this opportunity to put together a proposal to make a difference in my community. And my freshman year at Baruch, when we applied, we didn't ultimately win. So when I got to Cornell, I was sort of committed. I learned more about the achievement gap. I really wanted to make a difference in my neighborhood. And I knew this competition was coming up again. And someone had given me some like pretty good advice. It was an older mentor. And he was like, you know, college isn't about what you learn in the classroom. As like crazy as that sounds, at one of the best institutions in the world, he's like, it's not about what you're going to learn in the classroom. It's going to be about the relationships and the friendships that you build throughout it. And so that was kind of my two-pronged pitch or approach to other people. You know, at this point, I was obsessing over the problem and the opportunity to do something in my own neighborhood. And I didn't have much as a sophomore at Cornell, but I had so much more than the kids I was growing up with back home. And here was an opportunity to work with people on something that I really cared about. And if it failed, it was fine because we'd build relationships that would transcend our time there at school and in the process get real world experience. And so we started with just that, right? It wasn't, let's go in here and change the entire world and education system and build this incredible company. It was, how do we do something that can make a difference in the lives of people that we care about, and at the same time do something together that we can all learn from and build our relationships in the process to make our college experience more meaningful. So we started there, and I think it made it a lot easier to just jump in. And then as things progressed, they started to snowball. I grew up poor, and so when you grow up poor, you want to be rich. And I had mentors who at the time were saying, Karim, you're smart, you're hardworking, go work on Wall Street. And so even though we had this up and going, I was still doing my internships to go work on Wall Street. So interned at Goldman and BlackRock. And it wasn't until my senior year that I said, you know what, this is great, but I really want to give this a chance. And again, sage advice. People said, if you don't do this now, you're not going to do it later. It's always easier to take the risk when you're younger. And I jumped on that and made the bet. I understood a very powerful lesson in risk tolerance at that point because none of my friends jumped on full time after. And makes absolute I remember like holding a little bit of a grudge, you know, like, hey, we started this all together, we're all in, but we had less than $50,000 in the bank account. They had all these incredible job opportunities at Google, PwC, the NFL, and so they jumped on those, and rightfully so. We had to be crazy, right, to give up everything that we knew and had to jump on this like one dream or idea. And of all the ways to do it, we wanted to serve low income kids in low income neighborhoods with no funding, no financial backing, and somehow we were going to miraculously make it work. And I realized in that moment that my risk tolerance and appetite was so much higher than the average person's, but it was probably still ridiculous and crazy to do something like that.
Yep, 100%. Wow, that is an amazing story. And when you finally got in there and started doing it for real, started building this thing out for real, were you going starting with just like one school in your neighborhood, or like how did that ball get rolling?
Yeah, I mean, we were much narrower in focus and much smaller in size. And so when we started out with summer. We started trying to get schools to replace their summer school programming. And I would say even before replacing it, we were just a supplemental alternative. And as you can imagine, schools we were going to weren't really excited about giving us children to supervise over the summer. So getting space was an issue. Figuring out how to reach parents was an issue. But I realized we were solving a big need and problem. And it's sad to say this sometimes, but our education system is supplemental childcare for families. And so
Yeah.
while no school wanted to bring us in to pitch their families, the families really wanted something over the summer. So my high school principal gave us a classroom that we were able to run programming out of. And then my friends and I, like, we kind of went out there and we held these like clipboards and asked parents after school as they were being dismissed from the elementary school if they needed something for the summer for their children. And for them, they're like, absolutely, right? Childcare, food, like go. And the adults in the education system, when they think of college students, they're not thinking of responsible, hardworking, like people who are going to oversee and be competent working with my children. They're thinking of typically irresponsible college students, solo cups, beer pong, not the person that you want working with your children without any adult supervision. So,
Right.
but it just went to show you how low the bar was for families who needed something over the summer. And it was free breakfast, free lunch, and time away from home. And more importantly, what we realized, time with friends. So when you're working in unsafe neighborhoods and parents are working 24/7, the kids are just locked in at home, right? Like, don't leave the house. You sit home, you watch TV, you play video games until I'm back from work. And the kids weren't coming because they were excited to learn at first. They were coming because they were excited to see their friends, and it was better than being in the home doing nothing basically all day.
Yeah, the social aspect definitely still important. Yeah. And so I also wanted to touch on being an entrepreneur and having entrepreneurs watch this channel. There's things that kind of stumble us along the way. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
wondering, like, when you got started and got this thing building and going, what went wrong and how did you get past
Yeah, I mean, what didn't go wrong? So,
it?
I think there's a the inevitable, right, and of just being an entrepreneur, you're going to face challenges. And I think one of the things I appreciated most about this journey is at the simplest form, an entrepreneur is a problem solver. And so you don't get the title of being a problem solver without having problems to solve. And so you're always going to have problems to solve along the way. And one of the most powerful pieces of advice that is just, it feels so cliche, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense until you're actually in it. But when you ask the most successful entrepreneurs, like, what was it for them? They'll tell you just like never give up. Right. And so you need to have this attitude or mindset that when you go into it, that you're never going to give up. And so what does that like require you to do in the process? Well, it means you need to be a voracious learner. And it means that every single problem that you see needs to be seen as an opportunity. There's always a silver lining. And you need to make sure that you have a network of people that you can ask for help, right? And you can accelerate the learning in the process of what you're doing. So in the beginning, I already mentioned a little bit, none of the people I started this with wanted to do it full time. So I felt like I was starting from scratch, coming out of school, trying to build a team again. I knew nothing about managing and leading. My very first team that I put together, there wasn't a single person over 26 years old. We were running almost a $2 million business, and we had cash flow issues right away from the very early days that I nearly drove the company into bankruptcy in the process. And I had an advisor who said, Karim, you can be an inexperienced CEO, but then you need to have really experienced executives all around you, or you can be an experienced CEO and have inexperienced executives around you, but you can't be an inexperienced CEO and have inexperienced executives all around you. And that's what naturally happens to a lot of people as they're building. And so I think just being really human, heart-centered, human-centered, that I sometimes don't make tough decisions in the very beginning, and you don't understand how to make the difficult decisions. And you're not thinking about, hey, when I'm avoiding these difficult decisions, I'm actually hurting everyone else in the process. And so there's
Mm,
some mindset shifts that I went through. I made the mistake of now building a board and then building a board and not knowing how to manage a board, and then undoing that, thinking that the board was the issue and really I was the issue, not knowing how to manage one. And so I think learn from that on the other side of it. I just will say, like, it is a very steep learning curve. The thing I've come to recognize and appreciate the most is that the bulk of the learning is on you, and it really is and should start with self-awareness. And so one of the things that I've been doing now for almost a year is publishing this free weekly newsletter called The Learning Loop, really targeted at founders, CEOs, leaders, at helping better cultivate that self-awareness just through questions, and using those questions to develop the curiosity that you need to be able to go and accelerate that learning journey for yourself. So a lot of things will go wrong because that's the opportunity, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be an entrepreneur, you wouldn't be a problem solver. And your responsibility is to recognize where you don't have the answers, to ask the right questions, to ask better questions, and to go out and seek the learning and the knowledge to solve the problems.
very well said. Well, folks, if you wanted some ideas or concepts to think about when starting a business, things to keep in mind to avoid whatever, just rewind that. Rewind that for the past few minutes and go back and listen again, because Kareem just laid it all out. It is mindset, and it is 100% starting with you. So beautifully said. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know if you have something that you'd want to add to that. Like, you're running an enterprise now, and I'm sure that, like, across the board have had failures, but you overcome them, right? So what's driving you through that?
Right. Well, basically, it's the inner knowing that I have, that I am here for a bigger purpose. I'm not here to just work for a 9 to 5 and then come home and sit on the couch. I know I have the capacity in me to change lives and to touch people and make a
Mm-hmm.
difference. And so, whatever iteration that sounds like, whatever iteration that comes forward for me, that's what I'm going to pursue. And I'm on my third one right now because the first two, I really didn't know what I was doing all that much. But
Mm-hmm.
being a voracious learner, I went out and got the courses, the mentorships, the programs, the books to figure out what in the heck I did wrong. And now what can I do right? And yeah, it's really comes down to that inner knowing. And I'm also very glad that you said it's important to have a network behind you that you can connect with and go and review problems with and talk about things with, because not everybody understands what we
Mm-hmm.
are as an entrepreneur and what we think about, what we deal with. You can't just go talk to your mom or your cousin about being an entrepreneur because it's not them. They don't get it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's so important to have people in your life that you can speak with about those things. And the other thing that I'll mention, and then we'll get back to you,
Yeah.
is how important it is not only to have that network, but it's important to focus on the people that you're trying to serve. Do not spend your time focusing on a bunch of tech to build out. Don't focus on the focus on the problem a little bit, but also it's mainly about the person. So you need these people. You need that connection to your client base in order to really figure out what they want, what they really care about, and what is going to make the difference when you speak because you're speaking to their values because you took that time to connect with them.
I love that. Like three things just popped in my mind, like that purpose piece, the self-reflection, and then the iteration for the ultimate beneficiary, right? And to your point about purpose, like having that clarity makes all the tough decisions that much easier because you know what you're working towards and driving towards. And if you continue to remind yourself, I'm doing this because I'm solving this purpose, makes such a big difference in your own motivation, your conviction, and how you move forward. The self-reflection, you're going to have losses, you're going to have setbacks, but they're only really failures if you don't learn from them. And taking
100%.
the time, to your point, of sitting there saying, okay, what did I do wrong, what could I have done better? Most of us don't carve the time out. We either want to go to the next thing because we're doers, or we dwell on the past and the mistakes that we made there. And then the last one is that ability to evolve, which that continuous evolution only comes when you're learning, right? We started out with summer because that was the problem, and we need to figure out a healthy balance as entrepreneurs between the pain point that we had when we were starting out and then the ultimate problems that we're solving for our end user and what those look like, right? So we started with summer, but then you take that feedback and you realize, oh, they need more help during the year. Oh, we have a gap here in the technology that they're using. Oh, they need more support when they're at home. So what do all those things look like? How do we then improve the content? So we're thinking about the entire experience, and it's okay to evolve. We're year 14, right? So I would absolutely say do not try and be everything to everyone in the very beginning. You don't even want to be everything to everyone later on. You want to solve the problems when you understand who your end user is. And it's not just a school principal, right? We have a very clear who statement, right? We're talking about overwhelmed Title I school administrators who care deeply about results for their parents and their scholars and the families that they're serving. So whenever we're thinking about anything, we're running it through the lens of, are we making the life of our who that much easier? So getting that clarity is also going to take time, right? It's a few years of iterating, solving problems before you really understand who your customer is. But then to your point, solve for them. Like you're done solving for yourself.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about the people that you're serving and how much of a connection you can form with them. And if you do that well, then you will be successful in
Mm-hmm.
whatever iteration that you come up with.
Exactly.
Kareem, this has been an absolute pleasure, my man. I cannot believe we're coming up to an hour already. So before we get too far gone, I want to make sure we tell people where they can find you, learn about you, your organization. Like, where can they start diving into your world?
Yeah, I mean, we're online. So the website is practicebc.com. So Practice Benefit Corporation. So the BC is short for that. So we're a public benefit corporation. And then the my personal website, karimabouelnaga.com. So just my first name and last name.com. Either of those places are a good place to start. But then we're also all over social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, we're probably on that platform. So we'll look forward to connecting with you all and engaging. And if there's interest in accelerating your learning, join our free newsletter.
There you go. There you go, folks. And the links will be below there in the show notes. So you can just click and go and check out what Karim has to offer and get on that newsletter. And before I let you go, I've got a little bit of fun here because you are in the education space and also using technology. I have this philosophy, not philosophy really, more of a hypothesis that as we develop technology, as AI gets more and more prevalent, I have this philosophy. There we go again. I have this hypothesis that teachers, in a sense, are going to be replaced by AI. And the reason is because the AI can learn from the student in that back and forth relationship and immediately understand the person's learning style, what grabs their attention, how they intake that information, how they process. It can do those things in lightning time and custom tailor the education to that student. So I'm just curious, what do you
Yeah, I
think
mean,
about that?
I answered this question on social media not too long ago, but I go back to like Socrates and Plato, and we think about the Socratic method and how what teaching really looked like, centuries ago. Forget about like years ago. And all it's done is evolved as we've continued to learn and bring in new things. And so I don't see teaching being replaced. I see it evolving again. I don't know what that evolution or iteration is going to look like. But the one thing I always hang my hat on is people don't learn because they have the knowledge or the information there. They learn because they're inspired to learn. And whenever you ask someone like who inspired your learning or what was the most influential thing that drove your learning, they typically go back to a person, whether it's a parent or a teacher, because there's a human connection there where someone is inspiring them to want to do something because they see something in them. So unless the AI gets to a point where they're seeing your innate potential, not just what you're capable of doing right now or what you need, but what the potential is for your life, I find it very hard pressed to replace the person. Now, can teachers get to a point one day using AI where they can teach 60 kids in a class instead of 30? Maybe. Can we get to a point where maybe schooling doesn't take 12 years, it takes 9 or 8 because of the speed that we can learn at potentially? Could we graduate doctors in 12 years instead of 18 or 20 years because of AI, like potentially? So I can see the role of the educator evolving, and I don't know what it'll look like. But I can't see a world where educators don't exist. And again, going back to the doubling of the school system as being an extension of childcare in some ways, just really hard to eliminate that human element altogether.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely take your point. Even if the AI systems are in there and everybody's got a tablet, it would still be a benefit to have a teacher at the head of the class, facilitating and
Exactly.
inspiring, like you were saying earlier. And especially when it comes to like the physical education space, it's kind of hard for it's kind of hard for an AI to teach you how to jump rope or throw a dodgeball at you or something, you know?
That I actually think will be solved without a person sooner. Right? All these tutorial videos, and now they have all these sensors and cameras that they're analyzing athletes with. So that I actually think will solve sooner than being able to eliminate the teacher. But I love your word facilitator because that's what I've been harping on for a little while is how do we turn educators and teachers into facilitators? I recognize we're not in a place or a juncture right now where it's always feasible, given the constraints they have in their classrooms or the changes that are naturally happening all the time that make it difficult to plan. But I'd love to get to a place where, again, teachers are there in the classroom. The inquiry is student led, right? We're giving questions, we're creating real world application, we're driving the problems, and then we're allowing the students to tap into what they know to further their own learning. Because this as an adult, once you get out of school, how do you learn? Right. Well, the basis of school then at the end of the day, from my vantage point, is to teach us how to think critically, how to problem solve, yes, how to read, write, and communicate. But I think more than anything else, it's to teach us how to learn. And once we know how to learn, then we're able to take our learning into our own hands. And from there on out, there's no limits, right, to what you're able to do once you're able to learn.
Right. The opportunity is there and there is no gap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, again, Karim, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been an absolute pleasure. Again, everybody, the links are in the show notes below. Share this show with your friends. Share it out to somebody that needs it. Again, those principals, those educators, share this out to them and share what Karim is doing out in this world. So, again, thank you, sir. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, everyone. Take care and peace. We will see you in the next one.